Sorry, I didn't know it was on.
Wait, I'm trying to see who that is because I can't see everybody at once.
Oh, my name's Jamie Cook. I just started my career in software engineering and tests, and I've just
Oh,
been
cool.
looking up resources and seeing your name.
Aw, isn't that nice? Thank you. Well,
Exciting.
welcome. Welcome to
Thank
the
you.
welcome to the profession.
Yeah.
It's a great
Welcome to
community.
testing. Yeah. Well, shoot, Lisa, right now, what bit of advice would you give someone starting as a set?
Well, my new thing is that, well, I'm sure people starting now realize you've got to test all the way around that, continuous DevOps loop or whatever you want to call it. In the right side of that loop of testing in production, observability, all those things. We all have to get into that. I'm going to be talking about that in my talk because our systems today are so complex, and we have the technology now to do stuff we couldn't do a few years ago. So I think that's a really important thing to learn and a really great opportunity for career-wise. So I would start learning about all the monitoring and observability and all that kind of stuff, testing in production. I'll give you some good resources in my talk.
Oh, nice. We'll save it then. That was a nice little teaser into the presentation. So what do you feel is one of the, because I think that like observability is a word that gets thrown around nowadays, at least in conferences. Now we hear things like telemetry and observability, and people are now realizing, hey, monitoring is a form of testing. But I don't feel like a lot of people actually try to dive into it at work. Do you feel like there's a reason why people get kind of stuck with something like
it's just so new. It's so new. People don't know what it is. Some people think it's just a new word for monitoring, and it's a little hard to explain. But what this kind of works out to is tool-assisted exploratory testing in production with observability and all the tools that let us do that, and with things like chaos engineering. We testers are used to doing exploratory testing, and it's using the same skill sets. So just with fancy tools.
Oh, I love that. Well, Kevin, I'll let you take it away because I think we're ready now to get started.
Okay.
All right.
Great. Let's get started. Welcome everybody to QA at the Point, and I'm going to do a super fast intro of Lisa, even though she's already been talking to us, and we can tell it's going to be a great night. But just for those who maybe didn't already read or haven't done any research, Lisa is the quality owner at OutSystems. Actually, for even anybody who had done the research, that's a new thing, Lisa. So maybe you could even tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, sure.
In your presentation. Lisa is also a co-founder of the Agile Testing Fellowship and co-author with Janet Gregory of 3 books: Agile Testing Condensed, A Brief Introduction, More Agile Testing, Learning Journeys for the Whole Team, and Agile Testing, A Practical Guide for Testers and Agile Teams. As we've also heard, you speak internationally. Are you actually going to give a presentation in Portuguese is my question.
My life goal is to give a presentation in French because I actually speak French reasonably well. And it's like all my friends in other countries who give conference sessions all the time in English, which is not their first language, just amaze me. So yeah. I live pretty close to Montreal, and so my dream is like someday maybe I can go speak in French at a meetup in Montreal.
That'd be cool. That'd be very cool.
And what golf course is that behind you?
That is Coral Canyon down in St. George. It's technically in Washington.
Okay, my sister has a house down in Hurricane, so the golf courses around there are just beautiful.
They are. They are.
I just walk around them when my family plays golf.
Well, this one's beautiful enough you can walk around and enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Lisa, we'll let you take it away then.
All right, let me share my screen. Do you see my
slides?
Yes,
we can see your slides now.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so happy to get to talk to you all. And I used to live in Colorado near Denver, and as I said, my sister's in Sandy, so I used to drive to Salt Lake area all the time. It's a beautiful drive through the Rockies, and I miss doing that. So when travel is allowed again, I can't wait to get back out there. So this presentation is based on a lot of material that's been developed together with, I guess Abby Bangser really kicked it off. She's the tester who's really led us into the observability and continuous delivery and pipeline world. Ashley Hunsberger, Lisa Hawk, my co-author, Janet Gregory, and I've paired with a lot of different people talking about this topic, and we keep adding to it and evolving it and learning more. So I'm happy to share it with you today. Oops, somebody's phone. So yes, I am a quality owner at OutSystem. I actually don't like that title. Like, what? We don't own quality, but we're really quality coaches or consultants. So we have a team of testers, quality professionals, and we embed in the different development teams to help them learn how to build quality in, learn how to solve their testing problems, and learn testing skills. It's a little hard because I think there are about 300 engineers and there are like 12 of us, but we're trying to hire more people and scale up. And I was hired to help build an observability practice at OutSystems. OutSystems is our product is a low-code platform, and low-code, if you don't know what that means, and I didn't until February when I learned about it at a conference, it's like a 4GL, if any of you are old enough to remember 4GLs. It's basically allowing people who aren't programmers to develop applications. Or if you are a programmer, you can still use the product and you can add code to it. So, and those are my donkeys. So I live here in Vermont on a farm with donkeys. And let's see. And then so Janet Gregory and I over the years have written books together, developed a video course, and we have this live course, Agile Testing for the whole team, which obviously it's hard to teach it in person anymore. So we have adapted it as a remote course, and Janet herself will be teaching it in June. So that's a great opportunity. She's the same time zone as y'all, and it is a lot cheaper than the in-person course. So I hope you'll give it a look. It's also, we mostly do it, we have trainers all over the world, and they mostly do it as private in-house courses except for a whole team. So a whole development team will attend the course and learn how to fit testing into short iterations and frequent releases and all that good stuff. So, I've been lucky to be on a team that succeeded with continuous delivery. So if just to define continuous delivery, it's about delivering small changes to production frequently. And even if you don't actually release frequently, if you're in a business domain where people don't want something new every day or every hour of the day, you have a production ready build. So, but I was lucky back in the early aughts to be on a team that we actually achieved this, and we didn't even have that word yet. So I think it started because back in 2003, when this team was in a startup and everything was complete chaos, and the day I joined the company, there were 17 showstopper bugs. Woohoo! And we sat down together and said, what kind of quality do we want? And we decided we wanted, code that we were so proud of, we would take it home and show our moms and put it on the refrigerator. And we really made a commitment to making our customers happy, because we knew we'd run into problems and we'd need a really strong commitment to get over those. And I think that was the key to our success, is working together at all those different testing activities around the DevOps loop. We didn't have the word DevOps yet, and we didn't know about the DevOps loop, but we learned how to bake quality in. And so I'm going to share some of my stories with different teams. Mostly I'm going to talk about a team that had more problems, just to illustrate how this works. Okay. So I know some of you might say, well, that Lisa Crispin, she's written books, she's a speaker, and of course, wherever she goes is unicorn land. And I'm here to tell you that my visibility in the global Agile testing community cuts no ice with any teams I've ever been on. I don't care. And our, my teams have the same problems as everybody else. So my new job, it's an awesome company, but it's growing really fast. Our R&D department 4 years ago had 40 engineers, and now there are 300. That's pretty crazy, and they're hiring like crazy all the time. And the product is an old monolith started in 2001. I wish we were all in a room so I could say, how many people are working on a legacy code project? So we're experiencing there we go. We're experiencing all the pain that so many of you are experiencing. I don't get to do anything special. Oh, somebody raised their hand. Do you have a question? I can't actually see. I can't actually see.
Sorry, raising my hand for the monolith.
Ah, yeah. Good, awesome. And so, you know, the team now, our platform, the bulk of our product is we can only release it every quarter, and we have to go through those things that I'm sure some of you have to go through, where you freeze the code, which is like, oh, horrors. After 20 years in Agile, I don't like to hear those words. And we have a big bug bash with everybody in R&D, and we dog food our product to make sure that that it's ready to go. So we feel all this pain. I don't want you to think that that I think it's easy. But I do think you learn more from failure than success. So one team that I was on after this wonderful utopian team where we really were able to succeed with continuous delivery really relatively fast, because we were on basically a greenfield project. Well, it wasn't really greenfield. We had a legacy product, but it was easier. It was early in the company's business life. It was easier to do new things. So I was on a team that we decided to move to continuous delivery. Let's do continuous delivery. It's cool. All the cool kids are doing it, but we didn't have the foundation in place to do it. We didn't have all the foundation in place. And so the good things we had were we had really awesome developers. They did a lot of great practices like 100% pair programming and test-driven development and refactoring and continuous integration and test automation at all the levels from unit up to the UI. So there were a lot of really, really good things. And we moved our product from being served on traditional servers at Blue Box to the cloud. We had Amazon Web Services and Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and we had the infrastructure. We had blue-green deploys, which means you have two production servers. One is idle, and you could maybe use it internally, and the other one's facing the actual customers. And what you can do is just deploy to the idle one, make sure it looks okay, and then flip the switch. And now the idle one is the production one. And if anything goes wrong, you can flip it back. So these are all things that help you mitigate risk. So our development director said, hey, yeah, let's do 2 deploys a week. Well, mind you, we were trying to do like weekly deploys and not doing a great job of that. But hey, why not? Let's do 2. And I just had a bad feeling about it. It's like, I know it's a lower risk when your changes are smaller because you're delivering more frequently, but I didn't feel that great about it. And one of the problems that we had was we had thousands and thousands of automated tests. I mean, the sheer number of automated tests was mind-boggling, but we still had a list of things that couldn't be automated. It's our manual release regression checklist. And again, I'm sure a lot of you have those. And that's one of the things where you start going through this checklist and you notice something funny. It wasn't something on the checklist, but it's like, oh, that's odd. I better go see if that's already in production, because if that's a new problem, we may have to hold up this release. And you go like, oh yeah, it's already a bug in production. Anyway, those kind of things just suck up your time. So this thing took up all our time. Well, when we were supposed to release twice a week, there were basically 2 testers for 30 developers. Not a great ratio. And it just was, all we were doing was doing this manual release checking. So we quit having time. We didn't have any more time to do exploratory testing. So we had all these great automated tests. Well, they weren't that great, as it turned out. And we didn't have time to do the exploratory testing. So what was happening? Well, first of all, we weren't doing very good at releasing twice a week. And when we did release, bad things were happening. That was terrible. So I just want to stop talking for a minute, and I want you all to just think on this for a minute. I'm going to actually set my timer. And if your team is not already doing continuous delivery, if you're not frequently putting changes into or deploying changes to production, whether or not you're turning them on and releasing them, what's the biggest thing in your way? So think Jeopardy music in your head while you write.
I'll make sure to have Jeopardy music for the next time.
Mm-hmm. I just watched Jeopardy while I was working out, so.
I feel like for different teams, I'm thinking about my work right now, and I'm already thinking of like, for this team, it's this. For this team, there's
Oh,
these 7 things. For this team, you know?
Yeah, yeah, because a lot of us have to support more than one team, right? It makes our lives hard, but it lets us cross-pollinate. Okay. Well, I hope that whatever that is, that you'll share it with your team. It's just, maybe you have a retrospective or something, and you can say, hey, I was at this meetup and thinking about this, and let's talk about it. So we're going to go into more things you can talk about. So I didn't skip a slide. Okay. So how did my team turn around this problem? Like, we're supposed to be doing twice a week. Often we weren't deploying for 3 or 4 weeks. It was really embarrassing. So, we were good at reflecting that. We were good at retrospectives, and we really agreed. We all agreed that the biggest problem was we were not doing enough exploratory testing because the testers were spending all this time on this stupid checklist, and nobody else wanted to do the checklist. We tried to fob it off on product owners or make developers do it or whatever. Nobody wanted to do it because it was, just soul crushing. It's so boring to do a manual checklist over and over twice a week or more because you thought you were going to release and then you had to roll it back and do a new release candidate. So the first thing that we did was just dump the manual checklist. We just said we're not doing it anymore. And interestingly enough, after we dumped it, there were never any regression failures that we would have caught with that manual checklist. So, and so the development director and the other development managers realized, they understood the value of exploratory testing. And this is something that I know is really rare, that development managers would know why you want to do exploratory testing. Part of it was they'd seen what happened when we had time to do it, but part of it was just they were just more open-minded about it. So they added exploratory testing skills to the skills matrix that developers needed to move up the ladder. So at different levels, they had to have different competencies of exploratory testing. How cool is that? So that gave them extra motivation to want to learn exploratory testing. And so we started having workshops to teach them how to do exploratory testing. And after 3.5 years, I had been begging to be allowed to pair routinely with developers, but the development director kept saying, no, you'll slow my developers down. He decided it might be okay if we paired. So testers started pairing with developers, writing with their normal work, writing production code, but as they're writing their code, we could make suggestions about, well, maybe you should add a unit test for this negative case, or maybe we should stop and go try this in IE11 and see if it works. So we started giving them just basic skills on how to do exploratory testing. And we also, another developer and I created a little short exploratory testing checklist that we pinned to the Slack channel. So at the story level, the developer pair working on that story were responsible for doing the human-centric, which is the term I like now better than manual, the human-centric exploratory testing for that story before they said, yeah, we're finished. And we also had things like Elizabeth Hendrickson's testing heuristics cheat sheet laminated and lying around for people to refer to. So we gave them a lot of help and support, and they were excited. They thought it was cool when they found bugs. We had kind of ensemble testing sessions where we did this together, and we did. Some of you might be familiar with Elizabeth Henderson's Explore It book. It's one of my favorites. And we actually read that together as a book club, everybody on the team, including the product owners and designers and everybody. And we used her charter format, and we would write the exploratory testing charters at the epic level or feature level and put those in the backlog along with the feature story, so they were visible and anybody could pick up those charters and do them. So when we had enough stories together finished that we could test more end-to-end on a feature, we would do these charters. So this was all one piece of the puzzle. As we did more exploratory testing, we saw the problems in production go down. And it was really nice, a nice, satisfying result. So I'm really big on visuals, and now we can do this. I'm really amazed about how creative people are these days with online collaboration tools. Like people on my team do amazing things with Google Slides that are not making slides out of them, but like making boards with sticky notes on them and stuff. You can be very low tech online and still collaborate well. But when you have a problem, the first step, this is something I learned from Janet, make it visible. When people are aware of it, then you can start talking about it. So I'm going to give a couple of ways to fit testing activities into continuous delivery using some visual models and frameworks. So Abby Bangser and I paired on a pipeline workshop at European Testing Conference in 2018, and I just learned so much from her and Ashley Hunsberger at that time, because my team was struggling with our pipeline, and they were like, oh, you know, you just need to visualize it. You need to draw it out and try to get your team together and draw out the stages or steps in your pipeline. So even if you don't have automated, even if you didn't have automated continuous delivery, which if you, or I said that wrong. Even if you don't have automated continuous integration, which if you don't, you should stop and put that in place now, you still have a path that your code goes through to get from commit to the source code repository to delivered in production. So write these steps down or these stages down, or visualize them, draw them on a virtual whiteboard, or use virtual sticky notes, you know, Mural, the really fancy ones. Do it together with your team. And in this example here, you see there are some automated steps and some manual steps or human-centric steps. And, you know, the problem is if we're delivering every day or multiple times a day, I don't think we're going to do a lot of manual testing because it takes too long. So how are we going to do that? So then we have to start thinking about using things like release feature toggles to keep features turned off until we've done enough testing to make us confident about it, or to use canary launches or dark launches where you only expose it to a few customers, maybe beta customers, or maybe only use it internally. So there are a lot of different approaches on that. When you look at your pipeline, the first stages in your pipeline should be the things that give you the quick feedback. So, oh, static code analysis. Are we complying with our code standards, whatever those are? Are we using good patterns in our design, our code design? So that's really quick feedback. Unit tests, those should run really quickly, quick feedback. So as you move over to the right, the feedback is slower. So feedback loops, we want them small, short, right? But we also want to feel confident about actually deploying the software. So as we move to the right, we're in more production-like test environments. We're doing more production-like end-to-end scenarios in our tests, and that gives us the confidence. So thinking about this on a visual way is really helpful. And thinking how can you get faster feedback? So can you make any steps in parallel? Can you use things like the release feature toggles to keep things turned off into production until you have time to complete all the testing activities? Now, I couldn't get my team together to do this. See, this is what I say. I can tell you to do these things and you say, oh yeah, Lisa said do it, but my team didn't care. So, so it's okay. I did it myself. I made my own map of our pipeline, which was way more convoluted than this. And at each stage of the pipeline, I'm like, okay, what is this stage trying to accomplish, especially if it's a test suite? What are the problems we had? Oh, these tests are always flaky. You know, and sometimes it was like, well, why are we doing this? It seems repetitive. Why do we need to do this twice? So it gave me a lot of good questions that I could then go ask my team. So we still were able to work on the problems because I would just come and say, well, I don't understand why we do this stage that we really already did something very similar. Oh, well, you're right. We don't have to do both those things. Or these tests are super flaky and people don't even pay attention to it anymore. Okay, well, either let's fix the flaky tests because probably those are really bugs, or just delete them because they're not adding value. So it sparks conversations to make those improvements. My teammate Joao Prensa did a great talk at Test Bash Home 2020 on deleting your automated tests. Very, very powerful. So do your automated test suites give you confidence? So think about your team's automated test suites. And if you don't have them, think about the ones you wish you had. You know, we rely really heavily on these. And on that team I was talking about where we were struggling to move towards continuous delivery, again, we had thousands and thousands of tests. It was ridiculous. And we still had really bad regression failures in production because we couldn't trust our tests. There was a lot of more flaky. And you know, our app, it was a single page app. It was really complicated. It was really prone to concurrency issues and timing issues. So it was hard to automate, especially end-to-end UI level tests, but we had to test the UI. We had to automate those tests because the business logic was in the UI. So yeah, what do you do when you have that kind of situation? So this is from Ashley Hunsberger, and she was inspired by Katrina Clokey's test suite canvas, but Ashley did her own version of it. And Katrina Clokey's Practical Guide to Testing in DevOps is a great book. So this is a great way to guide conversations about each automated test suite that you have in your pipeline, or again, that you wish you had. And I know this is really small, but I'll have the links and I'll send you all the slides so you can download this from GitHub. But what do we want to know from each test suite? What's it telling us? What's the information? Who needs to know that information? How did they get that information? How do we inform them? Do we send them a Slack message, an email? What risks are we mitigating with our test suites? How do we make them reliable? How do we make them give value? So without going through all of these, because we don't have time for that, some of the most interesting questions to me are around the constraints. I think Ashley pointed out this can also often be an emotional constraint because maybe you tried automating those tests before and you failed. It's kind of scary to try to do it again. So, and then engagement and failure response, that's another one. It's like, talk about this before you automate any tests or build your pipeline, because when things fail, what's the process going to be for who's going to look into that failure? So again, talking about this team trying to move to continuous delivery, we had the big monitors on our wall back in the days of real offices. And when the build failed, everything went red. It was real obvious. Messages went to Slack. But guess what? Everybody was pairing 100% of the time. They're working together at these pairing workstations. Their heads down, talking to each other. They are not looking at the monitor. They are not looking at Slack. They did not see the failure. So when we're trying to do our twice weekly deploys, like, well, we kick it off around noon and hope to be ready to deploy at 2, and the build would fail and an hour would go by and nobody would notice. And it was usually one of us testers who would look up and say, oh, the build has failed. Then you have to get somebody's attention and get them to fix it. Well, now they kick it off again, but now our pipeline's so slow, it's going to be 4 o'clock. Do we want to release at the end of the day? Well, we were not that confident, or deploy at the end of the day. We weren't necessarily releasing, but we were not necessarily that confident. So that was a big problem. So making a working agreement about who's going to respond to the failure and how that's going to work is really important. In order to correct our bad habit, well, we got together and had a brainstorming session. What are we going to do about this? How are we going to train ourselves to notice build failures and fix them? And we decided to put a blue police light in the office and hook it up to the build. And so whenever the build failed, the blue light went on until somebody said, I'll fix it. Or they didn't have to fix it, but they just had to make sure it got fixed. And that's not something you want to do for a long time, but it's a really good way to start developing a new habit. Of course, the remote people were off the hook on that one because they couldn't see it. But you could do something like pop up a message in everybody's IDE and say, you can't do anything else until you agree to look into this failure. So there are lots of ways you can do this remotely as well. So that's just examples of the kind of things that can come out when you ask yourself these questions. So can your team answer those questions? Are there any questions on that test suite canvas that you've talked about? So think about, I would encourage you to download that test suite canvas and think about what questions would you like your team to talk about? Because I think they're really good conversation starters. And I'm a fan of the whole team approach. These testing problems aren't problems just for testers, they're problems for the whole team. So I mentioned that this team had all these thousands of tests and they weren't preventing their regression failures. And so I started, as I was pairing with developers, I started looking at these tests, especially the tests at the UI level, testing all this business logic in the UI level. And I found they were mostly happy path tests, and some of them didn't even have assertions. Like, what's a test without assertions? How can these developers write really good production code and not know how to write tests? Because, we testers are really good at specifying tests, and they're really good at writing production code. So that's why I think the collaboration is really important. They had done all these tests in isolation with no testers helping them. So we need to do something, and it was a big problem and a lot of tests. So we got a representative group into a room, not the whole team because that would be too big, but we had, a senior developers and product owner and customer support and testers and designers, and got into a room and started drawing on the whiteboard the front end architecture. And then we looked at that. It's like, what are the highest risk areas? And we started writing those down in red. And, just an hour-long session, we had been able to prioritize the risks in our application. And then we could go back and start looking at the existing tests and see where we had gaps. And we also agreed together that as we worked on new features or fix bugs, we would go in and clean up the campground, like refactor the tests. We decided to start using a page object model for the UI tests, and because that would be a better design than what we had, which was really terrible. And again, as we started refactoring tests and adding new ones that were better over time, we saw that rate of regression failures go down. And even our cycle time went down because we didn't have failure, like, oh, check something in, test fails right away. Well, it's good that the test failed, but we want some meaningful failure that's quick to diagnose. And so this helped us with that. And we gradually improved our feature coverage for the really important things. And there are a lot of different ways to approach risk mitigation. I'm a big fan of risk storming with the test sphere cards from Ministry of Testing and Baron van Dela. I'm not sure how to say his name. He's working on an online version of this, which will be out really soon. One of my colleagues at OutSystems did his own online version. I mean, you can just scan in the cards and do it online. But, drawing a mind map can help you talk about risks. Traditional risk analysis, where you weigh the probability and the impact. These are all effective techniques. And I think it helps you think outside the box. It helps with your lateral thinking to use these different visuals. So we talked about a lot of different risks and how we might mitigate them with automated tests, or designing our pipeline better and shortening our feedback loops. But what about those unknown unknowns? Even if we do really good things like risk storming or story mapping or example mapping, or all the things that help us think about more possibilities in advance, customers still do things we didn't expect. Pieces of our infrastructure fall over. We have, nowadays we have these distributed systems and they're talking to external systems that may fail and we don't know. So what do we do about that? So that's where observability comes in, and we talked about that a little bit before I started yammering here. So what's observability? It's very new, so don't feel bad if you don't know what it is. A lot of people just think it's a new word for monitoring, but it's something different, and it's made possible by the fact that it's affordable now for most companies to store huge amounts of basically log data about what the system is doing and analyze that quickly. So we have things like machine learning to help us process these huge amounts of data. We have these really great tools that help us do this. So one of the good metaphors for observability is from Pierre Vincent. He has a really good talk you can find on Ministry of Test site from Test Bash Manchester. And he talks about, you may have a really fast car. So you're out on the Bonneville Salt Flats driving really fast. And so you got a fast car that gets you from place to place quickly. But what if there's a fog? I know you don't have a lot of fog in Utah, but it could happen. You have to slow down. You can't see, you have no visibility. So no matter how big and powerful your car is, it doesn't do you any good. But let's think about airplanes. Airplanes fly through clouds. How do they do that? They don't slow down because they have instruments. So they have another way to get that visibility. So the idea behind observability is we instrument our code to capture whole events. So we don't just log individual things that happen in the code. We catch a whole event, like a customer does something in our application. We capture that whole thing. So if anything goes wrong, we can go back and look at what did the customer do? Look at their whole journey. And if they're going across different microservices and through different APIs, we can trace that. And it gives us the ability to ask questions of our production system that we didn't know we'd need to ask. So we couldn't add any alerts for it because we didn't think it would happen. We didn't have any monitoring for it because we didn't know it would happen. But if we instrument and capture everything, now we can go in and explore and ask questions and find out what happened quickly. So the team that I've been talking about moving to continuous delivery, that was a few years ago, and we didn't have the fancy observability tools like Honeycomb and Lightstep yet. And I think Elastic has just released support for observability. But we still had a lot of cool tools. We had analytics tools like Mixpanel and Google Analytics. We had Splunk and New Relic and Datadog. So we had good monitoring tools. We could still dig around in our log data. And we read this article. I mean, somebody on the team saw this article, blog post from Cindy Sudhar and Copy Construct on Twitter, and passed it around the team. And we're like, whoa, testing in production, that sounds scary. But the way she explained it, it's like, no, it makes a lot of sense. And so she says, don't give up the testing that we're doing. Do as much testing as we can before we release features. But we know we're going to miss things. Things are going to happen we didn't expect. And that's where observability comes in. So we can create hypotheses, use that production data that we know what users are doing, create hypotheses around new feature ideas, and do a small end-to-end MVP or learning release, put it out there and look and see what happens. This is so valuable, and as testers, this is just such valuable information. Help us focus our testing, help us make sure we're delivering value to customers. So what makes all this work? It's working together. So I think one of it is the focus on value to customer. As a tester, I actually had my team, this is that really good team I was talking about back in the early aughts that we actually did continuous delivery. They came to me one time and said, Lisa, could you just first test the happy path when we're working on the story? Like, just make sure it works at all before you go off in the weeds in these edge cases and find all those bugs, because we just want to make sure it works at all first. Like, oh yeah, okay. So focus on what's valuable to the customer. You may be able to find a bug with some weird edge case, but maybe customers won't even care about that. It's, again, it goes back to risk. But the delivering the value frequently at a sustainable pace, I left out the sustainable pace part of continuous delivery. We're doing small changes frequently at a sustainable pace. We're not stressing out when we deploy. It's just a routine thing. We can do it even on Friday afternoon. And so by building quality in, testing in production, observability, by learning those new skills, we can mitigate a lot of risk and working together. So people on our team with different specialties, different experience, I like to think that although we all have unconscious bias that can be limiting to us, especially testers, it's like, ooh, confirmational bias, only seeing what I expect to see. That's really bad for a tester, right? But if there are other people in the team that have different biases, we'll see different things, and we can kind of feed off each other. Like, oh, you noticed something different. Ooh, I noticed something even more different than that. So it's really important to transfer these skills around. And I know in DevOps and Agile, we talk about generalized specialists, or I'm not, maybe we're specialized in generalists. I'm not sure. But you know what? Everybody on a team can't know everything about everything, they can't have every deep skill. We still need specialists, and we should try to transfer those skills as much as we can. So I think testers nowadays are moving more into a consulting and coaching role. Some of you may be familiar with modern testing from the modern testing principles from Alan Page and Brent Jensen. They see testers as helping everybody on the team, and Janet and I do too, help everybody on the team learn some testing skills, some basic testing skills, some heuristics, be able to work together and learn how to build quality and prevent bugs as opposed to finding them after the fact. Of course, we want to find them after the fact if we didn't prevent them, but more focused on preventing bugs. So this team, where we were struggling to do continuous delivery, we got really good. We worked really hard and tried a lot of different techniques to get really good at slicing our stories down really small, being able to do those thin slice end-to-end MVPs or learning releases, have a hypothesis that we think this new feature will cut down, you know, customer support tickets by 10%, or it'll cut down bugs in production by this amount, or it'll cause a 10% jump in adoption by new users, or whatever, conversion rate, whatever it is, using that data, driving our development with data, looking at production and letting that drive our ideas, and working together to do the exploratory testing and all those different activities. So how do we transfer skills? I mentioned how we did pairing, tester developer pairing, tester designer pairing across all the roles. And we also did mobbing, which people are starting to call this ensemble testing rather than mob testing, because mobbing is kind of a negative term. And we need a kinder, gentler world. So what we would do is when we had these small, we broke up into really small feature teams. And when developers had something ready, like 4 or 5 stories for a feature ready to go, we would get in a room with the product owner, the designer, a customer support person, the developers, a tester, and we would use a kind of a mob format where we had a driver, and then the rest of the people gave ideas of what to do. And in half an hour, we could get through 4 or 5 stories that were ready for acceptance, but either accept them or reject them, because whenever we had a question, the person who could answer that question was right there in the room. So we had 0 question queue time. And so for example, you know, if something looked funny with the design, well, the designer was right there. Or the error handling didn't seem quite right, well, the product owner is right there. So it just saved so much time, as opposed to putting those stories ready for the product owner to accept and waiting a few days until the product owner had time to accept them, you know, which slowed everybody down. So that's just an example of working together. We had to build relationships. So starting a new job as I am, I've had to take my own advice and build relationships, have virtual coffees with people, try to get to know people. You know, teams that are transitioning to Agile or transitioning to DevOps culture, they're not used to working with people in other silos. So it's uncomfortable, and we have to work really hard to build them. Katrina Kilke has a lot about building bridges in her book. So one of the best ways to make friends with somebody is to ask them for help. So, you know, go and ask an operations specialist, hey, could you come and draw the pipeline out for us? We want to understand the continuous or the deployment pipeline. When somebody helps you, then they think they must be your friend because they helped you. So just try to connect with people within your team that you don't work with a lot, people in other teams, people even on the business side that aren't in the software area. You know, it could be really good to make friends with them. It's like, ooh, make friends with the people in finance if you need some better budget for your own team. So this is something that can help. So let's pause for another minute. I'm almost done. And just think, for somebody inside your team you don't really work with a lot yet, or somebody outside your team that you think could help you and your team solve some of the problems that you have in getting value out to your customer at some reasonable frequency without killing yourselves. So write down a couple ideas how you might connect with them. I know it's hard now. Doing food is one of the most important things to make friends with somebody, and we can't do that now. I guess you could have food delivered to their house, but think about that for a minute. That's my donkey Chester, and we have lots of covered bridges in Vermont, but that's actually a covered bridge back in Colorado, so go figure. Okay, well, I hope you wrote down a couple ideas, and that's something that you will try, whether or not you get to go back to your office soon. So we know from science, a lot of studies, Google, Amy Edmondson, she has a great TED Talk on this, the State of DevOps survey results. Psychological safety is a prerequisite. If you go to modernagile.org, that's one of the modern agile principles. We need leaders who have a vision and they know how to serve people, how to support their people, get out of their way when they need to do that, let them do their best work. And that's what agile development was supposed to be about. And I was really lucky to be on agile teams like that. I was just super lucky. When you focus on speed, everybody thinks, oh, we're agile now, we're going to go fast. But what happens then? You start cutting corners, you accumulate technical debt or even technical guilt, because you're never going to go back and pay back that debt. So it's just guilt. And it slows you down. You start having areas of your code that people are afraid to work on or change. If we do work on or change, we have to spend a lot of time doing manual regression testing. But when you focus on quality, like my team did in the early aughts that succeeded fairly quickly with continuous delivery, we focus on adopting the extreme programming practices of test-driven development, pairing, refactoring, continuous integration, automation, all those kind of things. You build that solid foundation. And when you make the investment to build the foundation and also learn the product domain, you can end up going a lot faster. Learning the business domain is really helpful, because when your customers, your business stakeholders and product owners say what they want, you can look at the thing and you say, what do you want to do? What problem are you trying to solve with that? What's the goal of this new feature? And a lot of times you can cut it down and say, okay, we could do 80% of that feature at half the cost. Can you live without that other 20%? They usually can. That makes you look faster, but what you did was you cut down the hard parts of the feature that weren't really going to give them value. So making that investment, and we actually budgeted story points every sprint for several sprints so that we could each go spend time with different business people and operations people to learn what they did, so we could serve their needs better and solve their problems better. It was miraculous. Highly recommend continuous delivery. I love the principles of this, and I think that they resonate with the principles of Agile. So continuous delivery, Agile development, DevOps, we're all after the same kind of thing. Good ways to mitigate risks and put more joy in your work. We should be enjoying what we're doing. We have to spend a lot of time at it, and should be one of our values. So just take it one, I mean, I've talked about a huge amount of ideas here. Just take one little idea, take one small step, work on it with your team, and work on your biggest problem, make it a little smaller. I like to use small experiments with a hypothesis and some way to measure it that we can tell in a week or two, are we making progress? If not, that's good, we learned something, let's try another experiment. So have this conversation with your team, use the visuals, and we can have questions and answers. Like I say, I'll send these slides to you. Here's just some of my favorite resources around this kind of stuff. But yeah, now we could do questions. So I will stop sharing my screen. Oh, look, there's all kinds of stuff in the chat.
All right, so I collected up the list of questions here.
Thank you.
You bet. So you mentioned some workshops earlier about exploratory testing when you were, working with developers and other members of the team.
Mm-hmm.
Are those available somewhere?
I have the slide deck that I used for those workshops, and I'm happy to share that with anybody who wants. I haven't published it, but I do have a couple blog posts on my blog. So if you go to lisacrispin.com and search on exploratory testing, I have a couple of posts on the workshops that I did with them that explain what we did. And like I say, happy to share the materials too.
Okay, perfect. And then I wanted to ask, I've had TestSphere cards for some time, and I've always wondered, like, how do you use them? How have you used them to help, like, mitigate risk?
The way personally I've used the TestSphere cards is when I'm going to a planning meeting for some new feature or whatever, I look at what are we going to talk about, and I go through the deck and I just pull out cards I think might be relevant and take them with me. And as people are talking, I just kind of go through the cards, and it makes me think of questions to ask. So it helps me think of really good questions that it kind of just helps me with the lateral thinking, I think. Okay. So that's a simple way I've used it. But the risk storming, I had only done it at conferences before, but Joao Prensa, who's one of my teammates, he does it at where we work at OutSystems quite a lot. And he just did his first online version of that, and it worked really well. It took longer. Everything takes longer online, but it worked really well. And like I say, Barron's going to come out. The Ministry of Testing will be offering an online app for that too. Sure. But there are a lot of different ways that you can approach it. But I just think the cards are nice because they just get you thinking about things.
Sure. And for everybody's reference, if you're not familiar with the TestSphere cards, it's a collection of heuristics and risks and behaviors and feelings. I think just a variety of words to kind of for you to look through and trigger ideas and get you thinking about the product. Yeah, if you've got them there, it'd be great to just throw one up on the screen. I have them in my drawer,
but my drawer is such a mess.
I think I have some, but they're in my garage 3 stories down.
Yeah, I've got lots of cards here, but I'm not seeing the TestSphere cards. Oh, well. There's also, I'll put in a plug for my friend Lena, I don't know how to pronounce her name, Pagan. But contact me, I'll give you the names. She and I did a workshop last fall at Agile Testing Days called Can You Risk It? And she's made a deck of cards with different heuristics to deal with mitigating risk. Kind of like risk storming, but more fun because her cards are weird little creatures and stuff, and she has great little stories and examples for each one. So there are a lot of different techniques you can use with your team.
Do you have any desktop applications that you would recommend for observability tools?
Not really desktop. It has to be something that you instrument your code. I don't really know a lot about it yet. I wanted to learn about it, and I managed to get a job doing it without knowing anything about it. I was very transparent that I didn't know very much. I would just say to learn about observability, start following Charity Majors, Sindhu Sudharan, Liz Fong-Jones, Abby Bangser, because Abby does it more from the testing perspective. But the tool, one of the things that's really come out in the last couple of months that I think will be an industry standard is OpenTelemetry. So it's an open source project, and the tool vendors for monitoring and observability are contributing to it. So the idea is we have a standard way to instrument our code. a standard way to log these events from our code. Everybody uses that. And if you use that standard, then you can switch tools because you don't have to change your code to switch tools. So the big observability tools right now are Honeycomb, which got some really cool features that help you, like it suggests you where your problems might be. I don't know if it uses machine learning or what, but magic. Lightstep, I haven't used Lightstep, but I think it's pretty similar. And like I say, the Elasticsearch has come up with adding to the existing Elk stack to provide observability as well. I saw a demo of it today, and it looked pretty cool. The problem with Elastic is I think they'll support OpenTelemetry eventually. They're not supporting it quite yet, but I think they will. I've been told that Microsoft will adopt OpenTelemetry across the board within Microsoft, as well as they're contributing to the open source project. So that's one side of it, and so there are a lot of tools out there. It's basically, anything you can use to dig into errors, performance problems, like trying to identify, ooh, we're having a performance problem. What app is it? What module is it? What queries are causing the problem? And really dig down into it. I sound really stupid when I talk about observability because, like I say, I don't know that much.
Well, it's kind of still a new thing for testing, I suppose, or just a new word for something that
it's
for a while.
It's a new thing, but what I think is cool is our skills as testers. We're good at asking questions. We're good at spotting patterns. So you can look at these tools and see weird, oh, there's kind of a weird pattern in the production usage. We're good at finding risks. So they need us.
Which is an interesting thing to think about when you hear the increasing number of people talking about QA people becoming more and more coaches rather than actual testers.
Well, you're still an actual tester, but
yeah. Some people seem
more than that.
Yeah, some people definitely seem to think that it'll go the way of the dodo. Obviously,
no.
I disagree thoroughly, but I think a big part of what testers provide the most value for is their ability to ask the questions, like you're saying, ask the questions, get people thinking, and in a way that prevents bugs by asking those questions early enough in the development cycle. Sometimes you sit in a meeting, you hear a bunch of people talking, and you realize, wait, I'm not sure they're all on the same page here.
Exactly.
Right? And you could ask one question, and then somebody in the room's like, that's not what I thought was going on. And you've probably prevented a bug at that point.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Alan Page and Brent Jensen, one of their principles is basically, you help the team learn testing. So, maybe you'll even be out of a job sometime. I think in most business domains, that's not going to happen. There may be some business domains where, I worked on a project tracking tool. If it went down, nobody's life would be adversely impacted. They could go out for ice cream or something until it came back up. But if you're working on financial services or life critical systems and medical software, they're not going to get rid of testers. And people say, oh, AI is going to get rid of testers. It's not going to get rid of testers. It's not going to get rid of people involved in production, monitoring, and operations. It's not going to get rid of any of those things. It'll help us. If AI gets anybody out of a job, it's going to be developers, because you could teach a machine to write code, just give it enough examples of good code. But I don't think you're going to be able to give it enough examples of good testing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Well, I think that's all the questions I found.
Really? Okay. Well, I'm happy to take questions. I mean, I'm happy to just have conversations with people. Just contact me on Twitter or email lisa@lisacrispin.com. Or lisa@agiletester.ca. So we can continue the conversations, and sometime in the future I will be out in Salt Lake. So when we're all traveling again, we might meet in person.
Well, we'd love to have you at QAP.
Cool. Thank you, Lisa, so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And Carlos, did you have any final words, or should we let everybody go?
No, I think that's it. Lisa, thank you so much for being agile yourself and pivoting on the time there.
For sure.
And thank you for everyone for joining. I straight up hope y'all are taking screenshots and hopefully asking questions on your own. to ask Lisa afterward. Please follow her on Twitter if you're not already. I'm a big fan of Lisa and
Aw,
Janet
thank you.
and some others.
And we had such a fun podcast interview with you.
I know, right? The Avengers of Testing.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll never forget that. Yeah, so thank you again, and everyone have a wonderful night. Thanks for joining Q8 The Point, and we'll see you next month.